Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Tonight, we invite you to immerse yourself in a chilling short horror story. The Thing Under the Blanket. Uncle Tom barely managed to catch me as I staggered back, my eyes locked on the corpse lying stiff and pale beneath the blanket. Its lifeless eyes remained shut, but the cold emanating from it was enough to chill my very soul. It was late one autumn evening in 2003. I had just returned from the outskirts of our small rural town, carrying a handful of wild corn I had scavenged. My plan was to cook a simple porridge for my cousin Sammy, who had been bedridden with a mysterious illness. The kitchen was dimly lit, the only illumination coming from a single kerosene lamp and the flickering flames of the wood stove. A blackened aluminum pot sat on the fire, bubbling with the fragrant porridge I had been carefully preparing. Life in the town of New Hope was simple, almost primitive. Electricity had only recently been introduced to the area, but few families could afford it. My Uncle Tom's house, inherited from my late grandfather, relied entirely on old-fashioned oil lamps. The cold autumn nights often drove us to huddle near the kitchen hearth, where the warm glow of the fire was the only reprieve from the biting wind outside. I was staying with Uncle Tom for the summer, visiting from my home in the city. Uncle Tom, a tall, muscular man in his late 20s, lived alone. His reputation as a grave digger, a profession steeped in superstition and dread, kept him isolated from the rest of the community. His bachelorhood was a source of gossip among the townsfolk, who whispered of curses and vengeful spirits haunting those who worked so closely with the dead. That night, as I stirred the porridge, the eerie stillness of the house settled over me. Sammy, my sickly younger cousin, had been unusually quiet all day, lying on the bed in the main room, groaning softly. I decided to check on him, but as I climbed the creaky stairs leading to the bedroom, Sammy suddenly appeared in the doorway. He grinned at me, a wide, unsettling smile that stretched too far across his pale face. Beads of sweat glistened on his forehead, yet he stood with an energy that seemed out of place for someone who had been on the verge of collapse just hours ago. "Sammy?" I called out cautiously. He didn't reply, just kept grinning. Shaking off the unease creeping up my spine, I dragged him back to the kitchen. "Eat some porridge," I said, filling a bowl and handing it to him. Sammy took the bowl, but only picked at the food, barely swallowing a few spoonfuls. His silence unnerved me, but I chalked it up to fatigue. After finishing my own portion, I felt a sudden urge to go outside and play. The crisp autumn air beckoned, and I convinced Sammy to come with me, thinking it might lift his spirits. The two of us slipped out into the moonlit night, leaving the door unlocked as was customary in our tight-knit community. The children of New Hope were gathered at the edge of the woods, playing an energetic game of capture the flag. Sammy and I joined in, laughing and running through the shadows, the chill of the night forgotten in the heat of the game. But as the game wore on, something felt off about Sammy. His movements were unnaturally fluid, his laughter hollow and echoing strangely in the cool night air. After an hour, we retreated home, our laughter fading as we approached the darkened house. Inside, the faint smell of burning wood lingered, and the kerosene lamp cast long, distorted shadows on the walls. As we entered the main room, I noticed the bed was occupied. The blanket was pulled up over someone's form, which lay utterly still. Uncle Tom must have come home early, I thought, relieved. But when I turned to Sammy, his face was pale, his eyes wide with terror. "What's wrong?" I asked, but he didn't answer. Determined to ease his fears, I walked to the bed, teasingly saying, "Uncle Tom, stop scaring Sammy." With a playful tug, I yanked the blanket away. The sight beneath froze my blood. There lay Sammy, or at least his lifeless body. His face was twisted in a grotesque expression of fear, eyes wide open and staring at nothing. The corpse was cold and stiff, its skin an unnatural, bluish white. A wave of nausea hit me as the smell of decay filled my nostrils. My mind raced. How could Sammy be standing behind me when his body was lying right here? I spun around, but the room was empty. The laughter we had shared just moments ago seemed like a cruel memory. My legs refused to move, and my breath came in ragged gasps. Suddenly, the front door burst open, and Uncle Tom's voice boomed through the house. "Why is the door shut tight? What are you kids doing?" I stumbled out of the room, nearly colliding with him. My words came out in frantic bursts, but he didn't seem to understand. He grabbed my shoulders, shaking me until I managed to catch my breath. "Sammy," I choked out, pointing toward the bed. Uncle Tom's face darkened as he stepped inside. Moments later, he returned, his expression grim. "Sammy passed away this afternoon," he said quietly. "I went to get medicine, but it was too late." I stared at him, my mind struggling to comprehend. If Sammy had been dead, then who or what had been with me all night? I didn't sleep that night. The image of Sammy's grin and the cold, lifeless body under the blanket haunted me. And when I finally dared to look at the untouched bowl of porridge he had barely eaten, it was covered in mold. From that day on, I avoided Uncle Tom's house. But even now, years later, I sometimes wake in the middle of the night, my heart pounding, as if I can still feel Sammy's cold, ghostly presence standing just behind me. Thank you to all the listeners for daring to tune in. Goodbye, and we eagerly await your presence in the shadows of our next story.